The emergency family meeting had been called for 2 p.m. sharp on Sunday, with everyone required to attend. I walked into Mom and Dad's living room to find the entire extended family assembled like a tribunal, aunts, uncles, cousins and grandparents all seated facing Dad, who stood with his presentation materials. "Thank you all for coming," Dad began formally. "We've called this meeting to discuss a family investment opportunity that will benefit everyone, especially Jessica." My sister Jessica sat in the front row beaming. At 24 she'd always been the family princess, and her upcoming wedding had become the family's obsession. Jessica and David are planning their dream wedding for next spring. The venue alone costs $60,000, and with all the details Jessica has planned, we're looking at about $150,000 total. Murmurs of approval rippled through the room. This was Jessica's special day after all, and no expense was too great for the family golden child. "The challenge," Dad said, "is funding this celebration properly. But we've identified a solution that makes financial sense for everyone involved." He gestured toward where I sat quietly in the back corner. "As many of you know, Alex purchased a house 2 years ago in the Riverside district. It's a beautiful 3-bedroom colonial that's appreciated significantly since the purchase." I kept my expression neutral, watching my family discuss my property like it was a community asset rather than my personal residence. "Current market value is approximately $420,000, Dad announced proudly. "More than enough to cover Jessica's wedding expenses, with plenty left over for the newlyweds' future." Aunt Margaret raised her hand. "But Alex lives in that house. Where would he go?" "Excellent question," Dad replied smoothly. "Alex is 28, single, no dependents. A smaller apartment would be more practical. This house is too much space for one person anyway." I almost laughed at the irony. The house they were planning to sell had been my sanctuary for 2 years, bought with income from my software consulting business that they consistently dismissed. "But does Alex want to sell?" asked Uncle Tom, glancing back at me with mild concern. "That's why we're having a family vote," Dad explained. "This affects everyone, so everyone gets input. Alex will understand that sometimes individual preferences need to give way to family priorities." Jessica stood up dramatically. "I know this is a big sacrifice," she said, her voice quivering. "But it would mean everything to David and me." "It's not just about the wedding," Mom added. "It's about Alex making a smart financial decision. Selling now makes economic sense." The family nodded in agreement. They transformed my forced displacement into sound financial planning. "Let's vote," Dad announced. "All in favor of Alex selling the Riverside house to fund Jessica's wedding?" Hands shot up around the room. Aunt Margaret, Uncle Tom, both sets of grandparents, all my cousins. Even my 12-year-old nephew raised his hand. "Motion carries unanimously," Dad declared triumphantly. "Alex, we know you'll do the right thing for the family." I sat quietly watching them celebrate their democratic decision about my property. What they didn't know was that their vote had no legal bearing on my house whatsoever. "When do we list it?" Jessica asked eagerly. "I'll call the realtor tomorrow," Dad replied. "We want to move quickly in this market." "Actually," I said quietly, "you might want to check with the bank before listing anything." Dad looked confused. "What do you mean?" "It's a straightforward sale. Just some paperwork complications," I said vaguely. "Might be worth a phone call." The truth was that my house had been purchased through complex financing involving my LLC and commercial loan structures. Any attempt to list or sell the property without proper authorization would trigger fraud alerts with First National Bank, where I developed a strong relationship. "Paperwork can be sorted out," Dad waved dismissively. "The important thing is family unity. Jessica's wedding is a once-in-a-lifetime event." "Of course," I agreed. "Family unity is very important." The meeting disbanded with everyone congratulating Jessica. Several relatives stopped to thank me for my generous sacrifice. I drove home and spent Sunday evening reviewing my banking documentation. Then I sent a brief email to David Richardson, Senior Vice President at First National. "David, FYI, my family may attempt to list my Riverside property tomorrow without authorization. This would constitute attempted fraud. Thought you should be aware. Alex." His response came back within 10 minutes. "Thanks for the heads up. We'll flag the property for monitoring." Any unauthorized listing attempts will trigger immediate fraud protocols. Monday morning I was working when my phone rang. The caller ID showed First National Bank. Alex, it's David Richardson. We need to discuss your property situation immediately. What's happening? Someone attempted to list your house at 9 a.m. this morning. Used your father's contact information but claimed to have power of attorney for the sale. Our fraud department flagged it immediately. Power of attorney? Apparently he told the realtor he was handling the sale because you were financially overwhelmed and needed family assistance. The listing was submitted to EMS before we caught it. But it's been removed? Removed and flagged. But Alex, this is serious. Unauthorized property listing is attempted fraud. We're required to investigate. 2 hours later, I sat in David Richardson's office at First National, reviewing the attempted listing documentation. My father had tried to list my house, claiming family power of attorney that didn't exist. The realtor was suspicious, David explained. Your father couldn't produce title documents or prove legal authority. But he was insistent that this was a family decision. I didn't agree to anything. That's what our fraud department assumed. The question is how you want to handle this moving forward. What are my options? We can file a formal fraud report with law enforcement. Or we can treat this as family miscommunication and implement additional security protocols on your account. What kind of security protocols? Multi-factor authentication for property-related transactions. Immediate notification if anyone attempts to access your account. A flag that prevents listing attempts without your authorization. That sounds appropriate. David pulled out paperwork. Your father indicated he'd be handling all communication about the sale. The realtor has been calling him about why the listing was pulled. What did Dad tell them? According to the realtor, he's claiming computer error and wants to relist immediately. So he's not giving up. Alex, did you authorize your father to sell your house? No. The family held a vote yesterday about selling my house to pay for my sister's wedding. They voted yes and assumed that settled the matter. David's expression shifted to concern. They voted to sell your personal property without consent? They thought it was a democratic family decision. Alex, that's not how property ownership works. No one can vote to sell someone else's house. I know that. But my family doesn't understand the concept. This is more serious than I initially thought. Your father isn't just confused about paperwork, he's attempting to liquidate your assets without permission. David picked up his phone. I'm calling our bank president. Margaret Chin has dealt with family financial abuse cases before. 20 minutes later, Margaret Chin, president of First National Bank, sat across from us reviewing documentation. A sharp woman in her 50s, she'd built her career dealing with complex financial situations. Mr. Alex, she said formally, this is textbook financial abuse. Family members attempting to liquidate someone else's assets. It's not malicious, I said. They genuinely think they're making good family decisions. Intent doesn't matter legally, Margaret replied. Unauthorized property listing is attempted fraud. He pulled out a thick folder. We see this often. Adult children whose families assume they can make financial decisions for them. Parents who think family votes override property rights. What usually happens in these cases depends on how far the family is willing to go. Some back down when confronted with legal reality. Others escalate until law enforcement gets involved. I don't want to destroy my family relationships. Then your family needs to understand boundaries immediately, Margaret said firmly. She handed me a business card. I'm going to call your father directly. Sometimes family members need to hear from bank officials that their actions constitute fraud. You'll call him this afternoon. I'll explain that further attempts to list your property will result in law enforcement involvement. That evening my phone started ringing. First Dad, then Mom, then Jessica, then relatives. I let them go to voicemail. The voicemails were progressively frantic. Dad, Alex, there seems to be confusion with the bank. Call immediately. Mom, what did you tell the bank? They're saying we committed fraud. Jessica, Alex, you're ruining my wedding. How could you sabotage family? I finally called Dad back around 7 p.m. Alex, what did you do? He demanded. I protected my property from unauthorized sale attempts. Unauthorized? We held a family vote. Everyone agreed this was the right decision. Dad, you can't vote to sell someone else's house. That's not how property ownership works. But it's for Jessica's wedding. It's a family investment. It's my house. I didn't agree to sell it. So you're willing to destroy your sister's dreams over a house you don't need? I'm willing to maintain ownership of my property. There was a long pause. The bank president said if we try to list the house again, she'll call the police. That's correct. Alex, this is your family. We're not criminals. Then stop trying to sell my house without permission. But the wedding can be funded by people who actually have money to contribute rather than selling my assets. The conversation ended with Dad hanging up on me. Within an hour, my phone was buzzing with texts from extended family, ranging from disappointed to angry. Tuesday morning, Margaret Chen called with an update. Your father called 3 more realtors yesterday, trying to find one who would list the property. 3 more. All contacted us for verification when they couldn't confirm ownership. We've flagged your property with every major realtor. So they know not to list it? They know any listing attempts will be reported as fraud. What about family? I suspect they're learning that family votes don't override property laws. How are they handling this? Not well. I'm being accused of destroying my sister's wedding. Classic financial abuse tactics. Making the victim responsible for saying no. It doesn't feel like abuse. It feels like family. Alex, families don't vote to liquidate each other's assets. Families don't attempt fraud when owner says no. She was right, but it didn't make the situation less painful. What happens next? That depends on your family. If they accept your house is not for sale, this ends. If they continue attempting to circumvent property rights, we escalate to law enforcement. 2 weeks later, Jessica's wedding was scaled back to $25,000. Relatives contributed, but nobody tried selling houses. Family relationship has been strained but healing. They learned family votes don't create legal authority. I learned boundaries require intervention. Chin was right about financial abuse being common. What feels like loyalty can be manipulation. Jessica got married. Kept my house. Family learned property ownership isn't group decision. Fraud alerts got attention. Professional intervention creates boundaries.